Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the shadows of Dublin's underworld, back when tracksuits ruled corners and the scent of burnt toast and diesel marked every alley. Picture this: concrete estates dimmed under sodium lamps, a city groaning under Thatcher-era economics, and in the background, just barely visible through the pub haze and betting slips, a young man scribbles notes in the margins of shipping ledgers. He's not flashy, not loud, but Christy Kinahan sees what others miss. That control doesn't require shouting. It just takes patience. You probably won't survive this world, not because it's violent, though it is, but because it rewards the quiet ones, the ones you never hear coming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all listen from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1980. Dublin isn't yet a tech hub or a tourist charm. It's fractured and fidgety, caught between economic decline and the distant echo of continental possibilities. On the north side, in working-class neighborhoods like Phibsborough and Cabra, kids run scams while grandmothers still make rosary beads out of habit. But in the middle of this gray-toned humdrum is a teenager with sharper eyes than most. Christy Kinahan. At this point, he's no kingpin. He's not even street-hardened. But there's something peculiar in how he watches things move, how he notices delivery trucks pulling up late, how certain bookies seem to know the results a little early, how some convenience shops stay afloat despite having no customers. Dublin is a puzzle, and he's determined to solve it. He doesn't blend in, but neither does he stand out. Christy's hair is short, schoolboyish, his shirt's usually ironed, not the look of a gangland aspirant. And maybe that's the point. You see, unlike most who crave fast money, he seems allergic to attention. There's a mainstream historical fact here that most miss. Dublin's organized crime in the early 80s was in flux. Many of the previous generation's major players were either jailed, murdered, or simply burned out from the heroin wars. Into that void, new minds could rise. At first, Christie's interest is books, actual books. He sells secondhand manuals to students, then pivots into foreign language dictionaries. Import-export licenses fascinate him. It's not the contents, it's the customs loopholes. He realizes early that paperwork can be more powerful than any knife. And no one checks shipments labeled educational materials, especially if they're in Spanish or Dutch. That first margin play turns out better than expected. A few £100 in, triple that back. Nothing flashy, but for a teen, it's a glimpse. Not into profit, but into process. What's closest to Christy right now is the Dublin docks. He studies the rhythm of port workers, the shift changes, the security patrols. He's not moving contraband yet, but he's watching those who do. The city might still see him as another underachiever from the north side, but Christy has already started thinking like a chess player. Every move he watches has consequences 4 turns later. There's a story, maybe urban myth, that one night at the Halfpenny Bridge, he watched 2 junkies fight over a lighter and said aloud to no one, "The real money isn't in the hit, it's in the route it took to get here." That's the axis of his thinking. Others focus on turf. He focuses on transit. He begins cultivating low-level friendships with small-time dealers, not to join, but to understand. He learns how product arrives, who holds the stash, how many hands touch it before it reaches the user. Every detail matters. He writes things down, often in code. His friends think he's eccentric. Maybe he is. Many people still think that his criminal career started with violence or intimidation. But the truth is, Christy's early influence came from accountants and warehouse supervisors. So what do you think? Does that make him smarter or just less obvious? Around this time, Dublin starts to shift. The economy stirs slightly, and with it, new opportunities. Nightclubs bloom. Some pubs add private backrooms. Imports pick up. And Christy is watching closely, noting every new face, every van without a logo. He eventually tests a small loop of his own. Legal goods through a dodgy warehouse route. Nobody notices. The customs system is still paper-heavy, and digital oversight is years away. His first true operation is so unremarkable that even his closest contacts miss it. That's how he wants it. He rents a small room near O'Connell Street. Sparse. Bed, desk, lamp, no posters, just a map of Europe and a used typewriter. Visitors are rare, and those who do stop by mention how unusually quiet he is, even for an Irishman. There are no parties, no flashy girls, no pub crawls, just paper trails and plans. One of his earliest obsessions? The Dutch transport system. He's never even been there, but he studies it like scripture. Rotterdam, in particular. A port with volume so massive, oversight becomes chaos. It makes Dublin look like a village. By now, Christy's no longer guessing. He's building. Slowly. Quietly. The first whispers of his name appear in guard reports. Not for assault, not even for drugs, but for unusual patterns of commercial activity. And the thing is, Christy's okay with that. He doesn't want a throne. He wants a system. A pipeline. One that can't be traced back. One that works whether he's there or not. Late at night, in his quiet little flat, he types and retypes manifest mock-ups. He's teaching himself how to hide among shadows, not by being smaller, but by being invisible in plain sight. By the time the rest of Dublin starts noticing him, he's already on to the next port, the next loophole, the next layer of insulation. And still, no one's taken a proper photo. Christy Kinahan's rise doesn't begin with a drug deal in a dark alley. It starts with textbooks, before his name becomes associated with narcotics, boxing managers, and whispered warnings. He's importing used educational materials from continental Europe. This isn't some romantic origin story about the scholar turned sinner. It's far more surgical. Christy's fascination with logistics begins with something as dull as used French dictionaries and Spanish grammar books. Why? Because no one checks them. Customs officers barely glance at crates labeled educational reuse, EU origin. There's a mainstream historical fact here. During the 1980s, EU trade regulations were shifting. The Single European Act was on the horizon, and bureaucracy was heavy, confused, and exploitable. Kinahan notices that customs clearance in many ports was more performance than precision. He starts routing small batches through Rotterdam to Dublin, then later via Zeebrugge and Antwerp. The money is modest, but the patterns are gold. He learns which ports are slow, which agents lazy, and which paper formats make inspectors yawn. The real education isn't in the books, it's in the border behavior. He builds relationships with wholesalers in Belgium, though many still debate if that's where it began. Some claim it was a quiet Spanish vendor who gave him his first tip on EU freight codes. Either way, the outcome's the same. Kinahan becomes a low-level importer with a surprisingly clean record. Meanwhile, in Dublin, he doesn't brag about it. There are no champagne toasts or pub boasts. He moves through his days like a man with nothing worth noticing. Those who do cross him, landlords, small partners, note that he's unnervingly calm, even when double-crossed. He doesn't yell. He just leaves, learns, and adapts. This is a man allergic to waste. Even his failures are folded into the next plan. People closest to Christy during these years recall how methodically he lived. His wardrobe? 2 jackets, both dark. His meals? Cheap Chinese takeaways or tinned soup, consumed in silence. The only extravagance in his life was information. Shipping guides, port maps, language courses. Yes, language courses. Kinahan begins teaching himself Dutch and Spanish. Not the tourist stuff. Commercial vocabulary, maritime terms, customs lingo. All written in notebooks he guards more tightly than any wallet. And this is where he quietly diverges from nearly every other aspiring criminal in Dublin. While others flex muscle or fall to addiction, he sharpens his linguistic and bureaucratic blades. There's a story that during one minor port inspection, he spoke enough Dutch to convince the clerk to waive a secondary scan. The clerk forgot to record the waiver. The shipment? Textbooks on top. Something else beneath. Maybe hash. Maybe not. But it passed. And Christy took note. Many people still think that Kinahan's genius lies in being Ireland's El Chapo, a drug baron with flashy assets and thuggish control. But so what do you think? Could the truth be more chilling? That his genius lies in being the first to treat crime like logistics consulting? As profits increase, Christy doesn't scale recklessly. He doesn't expand the way eager gang leaders do, throwing cash into nightclubs or souped-up BMWs. Instead, he invests in insulation, new names, alternate addresses, P.O. boxes in Germany, shelf companies in Gibraltar. He buys a small, unremarkable office space above a dry cleaner's where only a few employees ever visit. It's mostly for show. The real operations take place through faxes, burner phones, and handwritten ledgers. Computers are too traceable. What's closest to him during this period isn't people, it's paper. Invoices, port clearance stamps, customs manifests. He learns how to forge, but more often, how to duplicate existing documents to blend in. There's even an early instance, though no one's ever confirmed it, where Christy allegedly reroutes a container mislabeled by a Spanish supplier. The goods were bound for Galway, but instead ended up in a storage facility near Limerick. The only way to trace it? A number scrawled in pencil on the inside flap of a shipping box. No authorities caught it. But Christy noticed. And after that, every shipment got a hidden mark, his version of a watermark. His operations begin to scale, not in size, but in elegance. Everything becomes smoother, less traceable, and strangely, less Irish. His methods mirror Dutch smuggling culture more than Dublin's typical street-level dealing. He's building an empire that doesn't need to be loud. You wouldn't see him walking around flashing money, but you might find him outside a courthouse, quietly reading a book about container ship ownership structures. That's not hyperbole. He's photographed in 1987 reading maritime freight and European taxation. A reporter snapped the shot, not realizing what it meant, and here's the quiet brilliance. By the time his name enters even a single intelligence file, he's already left town. Not because he's fleeing, but because he's moved the chessboard. Again, one friend recalls a peculiar weekend when Kinahan refused to leave his flat for 2 days, not out of fear, but because he was translating a Belgian VAT document line by line. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't even swear. He just studied, the friend said. This wasn't a man looking for thrills. This was a man designing silence. By the late 80s, shipments grow, not wildly, just enough to draw the first tremor of attention. The Criminal Assets Bureau hasn't yet formed, but revenue officers are starting to whisper about a pattern, a name, Kinahan. But by then, Christy's already split his identity into 3 legal aliases, all registered, all clean, each tied to a different P.O. box, each used in different countries with non-overlapping documentation. One alias, allegedly, even had a tax return filed in Luxembourg, audited, passed. To say Kinahan is careful is like saying chess involves moving pieces. It's a vast understatement. And as 1989 approaches, Dublin begins to swell with unrest again. The heroin flood is starting. The younger dealers want easy money, but Christy wants control. Not of users, not of turf, of routes. He's not dreaming of back alley deals. He's imagining corridors. By the time the first cartel murmurs arise, he's already testing runs that connect southern Spain to Irish soil, without a single Irish fingerprint along the way. And somehow still, the textbooks arrive on time. Some men rise through noise. Christy Kinahan rises through whispers. Phibsborough in the early 1990s is not glamorous. It's a dense patchwork of takeaway joints, betting shops, and stubborn pubs that haven't changed the wallpaper since the 70s. Locals drink in the same seats their fathers did. But for those who listen closely, something is changing in the timbre of conversations. Underneath the usual pub banter about politics and GAA scores, a new name curls into the background like cigarette smoke. Christy, but not in the way you'd expect. People aren't afraid, yet. They're curious. Christy Kinahan, the quiet lad with books in his bag and almost no visible vices, is suddenly being mentioned by men who drive too carefully and wear watches too plain to be cheap. In McGo's bar off the main road, an old man whispers, "That Kinahan fella, he's clever. Doesn't touch the stuff himself. Doesn't shout either." This is not admiration. It's awe mixed with confusion. Dublin's crime lords are supposed to come with gold chains and loud shirts. Christy comes with ledgers and a poker face. There's a mainstream historical fact here. At this time, most of Dublin's crime families are tangled in violent feuds. Turf wars erupt over heroin territories. Bodies turn up in canals. Police surveillance squads burn through budget trying to follow unpredictable foot soldiers. But Christy is nowhere near the street. What's closest to him now are middlemen. Men who deal with dealers. Men who never touch product but can recite freight schedules by heart. He surrounds himself with people who know how to disappear between jurisdictions. This is when Kinahan first begins vetting. Not for brawn, not even for loyalty, but for discretion. If you talk too much, even in praise, you're out. According to one former associate, Christy had a strange rule. If someone said your name before you entered a room, you were in the wrong room. So, what do you think? Is that paranoia or professionalism? Many people still think that Kinahan's coldness made him dangerous. But perhaps what made him dangerous was that he expected silence from others as religiously as he practiced it himself. He begins frequenting cafes frequented by port clerks and small-time importers. Not flashy places, no suits, just croissants, coffee, and cargo talk. One story goes that he once sat 3 tables away from a customs officer for 6 straight mornings, learning his lunch habits, not to bribe him, but to understand his schedule. Every week, he adds another layer, another courier who doesn't know who pays them, another company with no visible director, another invoice that, if checked, would appear utterly unremarkable. Dublin law enforcement starts noticing a pattern. Product arrives, but no one knows from where. The usual suspects are clean. Informants say the same thing again and again. It's not him who brings it. It's someone who works for someone who might be working for him. He becomes the whisper behind every rumor, the maybe in every investigation. There's a moment, sometime in 1991, when Christy supposedly attends a wake, not for a family member but for an old schoolmate. A guard who was there later said, "He walked in like a priest, calm, measured, not grieving, just observing." That same night, 2 known dealers go missing, not murdered, just vanished. No bodies, no notes. That's the thing with Christy. You can't pin anything to him. There's no signature move, no calling card, just a constant quiet retreat from traceability. He keeps a flat above a butcher's in Drumcondra. Sparse, of course. But there's a wall with thumbtacked shipping routes, colored yarn connecting Spain to Ireland through unlikely middle stops. Algarve, Jersey, Cherbourg. He starts studying offshore banking laws, uses library cards under aliases. He's not hiding from the police. He's hiding from predictability. And here's the twist. Kinahan doesn't like drugs. Not as a user. Not even philosophically. One old contact recalled, he said once, "It's not about the heroin. It's about the holes it creates. Holes make room for systems. The man's genius is this. He doesn't build a business around product. He builds it around weakness, around predictability, around the idea that if you can control the boring parts, port schedules, truck drivers, language nuances, you can control everything. And Dublin is predictable. The guards follow leads. The thugs follow grudges. But Christy follows paperwork. In one notable moment, though never confirmed by law enforcement, he allegedly intercepts a shipment meant for a rival crew simply by sending a better offer to the freight company. No guns, no threats, just a competing invoice and a private courier. By 1992, people have stopped asking where he is. They start asking how he is everywhere. He no longer moves in plain sight. He moves beneath it. Some say he sleeps only 4 hours a night, that he eats the same breakfast every morning, plain toast and black coffee, so his routine never creates a pattern for outsiders to track. Even his romantic life is blurred. Some think he's married, others swear he's celibate. None can prove either. And all the while, his name echoes through places it shouldn't. Ferry terminals, customs lines, Western Union counters, not as a suspect, but as a template. "Do it like Kinahan," someone once said. He's never the one holding the bag. Even his handwriting becomes a topic of gossip. Small, sharp, like it's hiding something in the margins. And those margins? They're where he builds his world. He isn't just playing chess anymore. He's designing the board. The arrest doesn't come with a bang. It never does for men like Christy Kinahan. It comes with paperwork. Quiet, bureaucratic, and full of small boxes ticked by clerks who don't even know who they've touched. By the early 90s, Christie's movements are no longer invisible, just extremely inconvenient to follow. But then, like all who dabble too long in gray zones, he slips. Not with drugs, not with guns, but with fraud. He's arrested on what the press labels low-level financial misconduct, which is another way of saying, we don't really know how to describe what this guy did. There are documents, yes, shell companies, forged names, manipulated invoices, but nothing violent, nothing flashy. A judge calls it an elaborate but oddly bloodless scheme. One guard mutters, "It was like trying to handcuff fog." There's a mainstream historical fact here. At the time, the Irish prison system is bursting with petty criminals, addicts, burglars, small-time pushers. But white-collar crime? Financial fraud? Those guys are rare enough to be novelties. And Christy, well, he reads in his cell. He doesn't start fights, doesn't join factions. He studies. Mountjoy Prison, where he's sent, isn't exactly a college, but for Kinahan, it becomes one. He reads legal journals, practices language drills, and, famously, scribbles out business structures on the backs of tea cartons. Other inmates joke he's the only man who enters prison with less muscle and leaves with more spreadsheets. But even more importantly, prison becomes a recruitment pool. He spots those with logistics potential, drivers, smugglers, guys with connections to Spain, the Netherlands, even Morocco. He listens more than he speaks. A habit he's had since the beginning. What's closest to Christy now isn't his freedom, it's ideas, flowcharts, human nodes in a future system. He doesn't think of this as lost time. He thinks of it as research and development. There's a persistent rumor that in prison, he once organized a contraband smuggling ring, not for profit, but just to test how many hands he could pass something through without it getting traced. A coffee packet moved from one cell block to another through 5 intermediaries. None of them knew who it was for. Classic Kinahan. He writes to contacts outside. Carefully. Never specifics. Just comments like, "We should look into expanding the language scope on our materials," or "Rotation will keep things fresh." To anyone else, it's nonsense. To the right reader, it's instructions, and he's not idle physically either. He walks every day, precisely. Same route, same pace. It's not exercise, it's rehearsal. For what? No one knows. His release comes earlier than expected. Good behavior, limited charges, and a court system that still doesn't quite know what to do with someone who's clearly criminal, but not in any way they can articulate cleanly. He walks out of Mountjoy quieter than when he entered. No welcome party, no handshakes. Just a man in a dark coat with a folded newspaper under his arm. Many people still think that his time in prison was the blip that slowed him down. So what do you think? Was it a setback or a strategic pause? Because from this point forward, things shift. Christy stops playing the game like a Dublin smuggler and starts playing like a global strategist. Gone are the local warehouses. Gone are the street-level haggles. Now, it's logistics through Panama, shipping through Cyprus, meetings in Brussels, not bars, and his inner circle? He trims it. A lot. No more hangers-on. Just a few multilingual, clean-faced men who've never been arrested and always pay in cash. No tattoos. No long stories. One of them, allegedly, was a former accountant who'd worked for a major Irish supermarket chain. Another was a Moroccan with a background in ferry logistics. They were chosen not for loyalty, but for fluency, in systems, not in slang. There's a point in late '94 when Kinahan allegedly meets with a Dutch broker in a Brussels hotel room. They talk about pineapples and shipping delays. But what's hidden inside the pineapples? That's the question. The answer? Nothing yet. It's just a rehearsal. Just testing who pays attention. From here, Christy starts laying the foundation for what will later be called the Kinahan Cartel. But inside the organization, there's no such name. That kind of branding gets you headlines, and headlines are poison. He forms distribution hubs, not crews. He creates document processors, not runners. Language matters, perception matters. In his world, the more boring it sounds, the safer it is. What's closest to him now are the laws themselves. He studies extradition treaties, finds out which countries don't extradite for financial crimes, flags the ones with favorable banking laws. He maps his future not around power, but around absence of threat. He also begins grooming his reputation. He doesn't want to be seen as a gangster. He wants to be seen as a businessman, albeit one who happens to live quietly in a villa with tight security and no clear source of income. There's a myth that sometime around this era, he had a short meeting with an Italian connected to the 'Ndrangheta. If it happened, no one knows what was said, but the Italian, when later asked, allegedly said, "That man doesn't build families, he builds silence." Kinahan continues to move methodically. Every year, his footprint shrinks while his influence grows. He's teaching others now, not through lectures, but through systems, layered instructions, training modules disguised as invoices, and then he vanishes again. Not from the world, just from Dublin. His time there is done. He's seen the limits of what Ireland can offer him, and the risks. He buys a one-way ticket. Not to somewhere new, but somewhere quieter. Spain. Not for the sangria, for the shadows. The sun in Spain doesn't burn the same way it does in Dublin. It lingers, stretches across whitewashed villas, and makes everything seem slower, easier even. That illusion suits Christy Kinahan just fine. By the late 90s, Marbella is becoming a magnet for money that doesn't like to explain itself. Retired footballers, lottery winners, and more than a few men who never quite say what business they're in. Christy blends in instantly. He doesn't flaunt anything. No sports cars, no parties, just a rented villa on a hill where the curtains are always drawn by sundown. He doesn't speak much Spanish at first, but give it time. He learns quickly. Fluent in 6 months, some say. Others insist he was already fluent before landing. Either way, he's soon chatting with real estate agents, notaries, and bankers, always asking about fees, loopholes, and how to structure things a bit more privately. There's a mainstream historical fact here. During this period, southern Spain becomes a hotspot for laundering operations. Laws are lenient, banks ask fewer questions, and property is easy to buy under anonymous shell firms. The Costa del Sol begins earning nicknames like Costa del Crime, but the authorities are more focused on petty mafiosos than the quiet ones. Christy finds opportunity not in danger, but in density. There are so many shady characters moving through Marbella that being one more doesn't register. He becomes less noticeable by entering a crowd of other ghosts. What's closest to him now are lawyers, not criminal defense lawyers, corporate ones, the kind who speak in clauses and ride mopeds to tiny beachfront offices. He asks them about offshore accounts, about trust structures, about how one might own a property without technically owning it. He establishes several companies, all perfectly legal, all impeccably documented. The problem is not the companies, it's that no one ever sees what they actually do. Some list import-export as their purpose. Others claim to be in consulting, but they pay taxes, file forms, and stay quiet. He also begins using multiple identities, not forged passports, real ones, through legitimate applications in various countries, sometimes under variations of his name. One name for banking, one for property, one just to register a car. Many people still think that Christy became invisible through brute secrecy. So what do you think? Is it possible he became invisible by blending into a world that was already allergic to scrutiny? Because Marbella is full of men like Christy, or trying to be. The difference is, most can't resist showing off. Christy resists everything. He doesn't flash a watch, doesn't host pool parties, doesn't wear gold rings. If he owns a yacht, no one ever sees him on it, but his influence starts rippling across Europe. Shipments become more frequent, routes longer, more complex. Instead of direct lines from A to B, he creates zigzags. Colombia to the Canary Islands, then to Belgium, then Spain, then Ireland. Each step handled by a different face, a different company, often a different language. One investigator later described it like this: he built a spider web where each thread only knows the two it's touching. Cut one, and the rest still holds. It's around this time that Christy begins building his philosophy of crime, not as conquest, but as continuity. He doesn't want to win the game. He wants to keep it going, quietly, indefinitely, in Marbella. He buys a modest property through a shell firm. Not beachfront, not gated, just safe. A place where no one asks questions if you pay on time and never park outside for too long. He establishes a network of couriers, each unaware of the others. They meet handlers in parking lots, cafes, train stations. Nothing dramatic, no briefcases full of cash. Just subtle exchanges, a folded paper, a flash drive, a memory. There's even a rumor that Christy once paid a man to deliver a single USB stick from Dublin to Barcelona, not because the content mattered, but to see how many CCTV cameras the courier would pass. The point wasn't the stick, it was the test. What's closest to Christy now is not the thrill of the deal, but the satisfaction of control. He starts vetting potential recruits not by their muscles, but by their ability to listen, remain calm, and disappear if needed. One test, allegedly, involves giving an operative the wrong train time, just to see if they'll complain or adapt. Those who complain are never called again. He avoids anyone who wants fame. He says no to people who ask too many questions. He cuts off ties with those who drink too much, laugh too loudly, or show up late. And while other criminal empires lean into intimidation and spectacle, Christy leans into manners. He's known for being courteous, even to enemies. One Spanish contact claimed, "He thanked me after rejecting my offer. It was the most polite refusal I'd ever received, and I never heard from him again." It's here, in Spain, that Christy starts drawing closer to other international players. Dutch contacts, Balkan transporters, South American middlemen. He doesn't dominate them. He coordinates. He becomes the thread between them. And through it all, he remains a ghost in Marbella. He's seen, but only vaguely. Mentioned in passing, no headlines, no arrests, just a quiet man in sunglasses who always pays in cash and never eats in the same cafe twice in a row. He stops being just a criminal. He becomes a principle, a method, a style of doing things. And all across Europe, others begin copying his ways. Silent chains, clean hands, deniable links. Christy doesn't mind. Imitation is insulation. If everyone's doing it, no one gets noticed. And yet, behind the scenes, he remains the architect. Watching, adjusting, expanding. From a villa no one can find, under a name no one can trace, Marbella becomes his chessboard. But Christy Kinahan doesn't need to control every piece, just the angles. By the early 2000s, he's built something that doesn't look like a cartel, not in the traditional sense. No central warehouse, no boss issuing decrees from a leather chair. What Christy has created is more like a supply chain hidden inside the folds of global commerce. This is the stage where his legend deepens, not because of what he does, but because of what he doesn't do. No arrests, no outbursts, no signature move. He cycles between Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium, never too long in one place. Always just long enough to open a bank account shake a hand, or sign a document. What's closest to Christy now is distance. Not emotional, not ideological, logistical. Every key operation is layered by multiple handlers. He isn't at the port. He isn't at the drop. He isn't at the handover. He's the design behind it. And this is the moment when drugs truly enter the frame. Not the handfuls of hashish from the old days, but something bigger. Industrial scale shipments, cocaine, tons, not kilos. There's a mainstream historical fact here. European demand for cocaine spikes in the early 2000s, especially in the UK and Ireland. Latin American cartels, long focused on the US market, begin turning their gaze across the Atlantic. But they need infrastructure. They need quiet hands. Christy offers both. His connections grow. Dutch ports, Antwerp warehouses, Moroccan intermediaries, and whispered conversations in Madrid boardrooms. He becomes known not for muscle, but for efficiency. If Christy's crew is involved, the cargo arrives on time, untouched and untraceable, but there's no Kinahan signature stamped on anything, and he ensures it stays that way. He begins building a network so compartmentalized that even the people working inside it can't identify who's above or beside them. It's like this. If you're holding a box in Brussels, you don't know where it came from, only where to take it. And the man who gave it to you, he won't answer calls after tonight. Many people still think that the Kinahan Cartel emerged suddenly, fully formed, when tabloids started using the term. So, what do you think? Could it be that by the time the media gave it a name, Christy had already reshaped the European underworld for over a decade? Because here's the truth. He never names anything. His empire grows namelessly, like moss across legal loopholes and jurisdiction gaps. He diversifies too. One of his companies begins investing in vehicle logistics, car rentals, luxury imports. Another gets into tourism, on paper at least. But those businesses don't advertise. They don't even have websites. What's closest to Christy now are numbers, ledger entries, fleet records, fuel usage, flight manifests. Every piece of information is a stitch in his invisible quilt. And then comes a curious turn: education. Christy begins pushing his people, drivers, couriers, even mid-level coordinators, to improve their language skills, their paperwork, their understanding of legal terminology. One man recounts being handed a copy of the Schengen Border Code instead of cash after completing a job. The message is clear. This is not just about money. This is about evolution. He's creating something more resilient than a crew. He's forming a culture, a code. One that prizes discipline, restraint, and above all, silence. One operative, when arrested years later, admitted, "I never once met the top guy, didn't even know his real name. But I knew what would happen if I broke the rules." And this is how Christy rules. Not through threats, through expectations. In Marbella, he's seen walking the beach alone. No entourage, no security detail, just a phone he never answers in public. He's more myth than man by now. A legend stitched from rumor and redacted files. Interpol gets curious. So do the Spanish authorities. But Christy never gives them enough. Always too far away. Always too well insulated. He develops a taste for neutral places. Geneva, Dubai, Vienna. Cities where money whispers and police departments are politely overwhelmed. What's closest to him during this phase is precision. Not efficiency, precision. Routes that avoid certain airspaces. cargo that moves only on days when port unions are distracted, flights that leave just before new security protocols take effect. He even begins studying maritime law, particularly the regulations around transshipment and container audits. Why? Because the less time a container spends on land, the harder it is to examine. There's a moment, according to Dutch intelligence leaks, where a shipment tied loosely to Kinahan's network vanishes mid-sea, diverted by a ghost ship flagged under a Caribbean nation with no functioning customs authority. How? No one can say. But Christy likely knew the coordinates before the Coast Guard did, and still, no fingerprints, no images, no wiretapped calls. He becomes a kind of ambient presence, there but nowhere. Even his former associates struggle to describe him. He never yells, one says, just asks questions, and somehow you leave thinking you made the decision. Another adds, he'd say, you don't need to know everything, just the next 2 steps. And somehow, that was enough. And then, suddenly as always, he's gone again. Not dead, just shifted. A new address, a new layer, a new identity. He doesn't fear being found. He fears being defined. The first major shipment doesn't make the front pages. It doesn't even make the gossip pages. But somewhere, in a cold logistics hub outside Rotterdam, a container clears inspection without being opened. No sirens, no alerts. Just a tap on a clipboard and the quiet wheeze of hydraulic brakes. And that's how it begins. No one's sure what was inside. Some say hashish, others swear it was cocaine. But everyone agrees it was big. Big enough to signal that Kinahan had crossed a threshold. He wasn't dabbling anymore. He was scaling. Here's the mainstream historical fact. By the early 2000s, Europe's ports are processing millions of containers annually. Most are never opened. Authorities can't possibly inspect everything. Smugglers rely on this overload. And Christy Kinahan, he thrives in it. What's closest to him now is abstraction. He doesn't move boxes. He moves routes. He doesn't know the street dealer in Dublin who will eventually parcel out the goods. But he knows the cargo's ETA, the paper trail it will leave, and the 3 identities it passed through before touching Irish soil. Many people still think that this kind of high-level trafficking requires brute force or flashy bribery. So what do you think? Could it be that all it really takes is boredom? The kind of patient, meticulous boredom that can outweight scanners, avoid dogs, and exploit that one sleepy customs official who forgets to double-check a barcode. Because Kinahan isn't out there shipping drugs. He's not loading crates in the dead of night. He's watching spreadsheets, border law updates, and shipping insurance protocols. The real product is trust, the kind his network has in his design. He uses legitimate freight companies, often through brokers who don't even realize they're part of something bigger. A tomato shipment with a slightly altered invoice, a furniture load with a suspiciously heavy pallet, each piece precisely placed. Some containers travel longer than necessary, intentionally. Extra stops, extra stamps. Confusion breeds credibility. After all, who hides contraband in something that's been checked 3 times? Christy hides things in things that look too checked. One former logistics handler, speaking anonymously, claimed, "It was like playing Sudoku. Everything lined up. If something didn't make sense, it wasn't Christy's." Meanwhile, Christy grows quieter. As the operation expands, he recedes. Not out of fear, but out of principle. He doesn't believe in central command. He believes in systems that self-regulate, and the people who work under him? Most don't even know they're working for him. That's the genius. One middle manager in Antwerp is told he's coordinating low-risk shipping for boutique textiles. Another in Casablanca oversees specialized vehicle import services. They're given budgets. They're paid on time. They don't ask questions, because if they did, they'd be rotated out. Not threatened, just quietly phased out, like a faulty part in a machine that can't afford noise. What's closest to Christy during this phase is structure, business plans, profit funnels, legal buffers. A container is no longer just metal and bolts. It's a puzzle, a vehicle for narrative. If the paperwork tells the right story, no one checks what's underneath the apples. He builds relationships with dock workers, not with cash in brown envelopes, but with favors, small gifts, and shared meals. He understands that the most loyal people are those who never feel like they're being used. In Rotterdam, there's a tale, probably exaggerated, that Kinahan once tracked a single customs agent's shift pattern for 6 months before using his lane for a test shipment. When asked if it was worth it, he allegedly replied, "I don't mind waiting 6 months for a 90-minute window." That's Christy. He isn't fast, he's precise. And when mistakes happen, as they always do, he doesn't panic. He redirects. If one container is seized, 3 more continue without delay. Loss is built into the margins. He plays with scale, not sentiment. What really stuns investigators is the lack of violence. Other cartels leave bodies. Christy leaves confusion. You know a shipment failed. You just don't know who it belonged to, or where it came from, or where it was going. This frustrates law enforcement. There's nothing to leak. No dramatic phone calls. Just perfectly legal emails about storage fees and invoices filed with immaculate grammar. Interpol begins whispering about the Irishman behind it all. But they don't have a photo, not a recent one. His trail is half-coded and half-forgotten. Everything he touches disappears behind shell companies, offshore accounts, and deniable intermediaries. There's a moment, a quiet victory that says it all. A container suspected of holding hundreds of kilos is delayed in Belgium due to a clerical error. The delay? 4 days. The result? Nothing. Because by the time they open it, the drugs are gone, replaced with books. Real ones. Spanish grammar textbooks. Christy's calling card, perhaps? And this is when his legend truly starts to haunt the minds of investigators. Not because of what they know, but because of what they can't prove. He's no longer just managing logistics. He's managing perception. He knows how long an investigation takes. He knows when a file goes cold. He knows how slowly governments move when the evidence is too clean, too boring. And all the while, shipments continue. Routes expand. Profits compound. From the outside, it looks like quiet success. From the inside, it's mathematical elegance. And Christy? He's in a villa. Maybe in Spain. Maybe not. The curtains are drawn. The lights are off. But the shipments, they arrive exactly on time. In the criminal world, showmanship gets you headlines. Silence gets you longevity. Christy Kinahan never wanted to be feared. He wanted to be forgotten by the wrong people and remembered only by those who followed his rules. By now, his core group has evolved into what some insiders call a brotherhood without tattoos. No flashy symbols, no oaths, just understanding, quiet loyalty, forged not in blood, but in shared protocol. Everyone has a role, and no one oversteps. What's closest to Christy now are systems of filtration. He's designing layers, not just of protection, but of belief. Each person in the operation knows only what they need to. They don't just work for him, they work through him. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Traditional European crime syndicates, like the Italian mafias or Balkan groups, were hierarchical and familial. But Christie's system is modular, decentralized, and far less emotional. It's like replacing a family business with a franchise model. Each node in the Kinahan network can survive on its own for a while, but when connected, they hum with unnerving efficiency. He begins cultivating younger recruits, not from street gangs, but from universities, law students, economics grads, people who can analyze risk and smile through customs. One former customs agent said, "You'd meet them and think, that guy could work in finance." And many of them had. Christy introduces a kind of corporate etiquette to crime. He expects punctuality. He prefers email to phone calls. Meetings, if they happen at all, are brief, polite, and typically take place in neutral spaces, hotel lobbies, airport lounges, rented boardrooms in Geneva. He starts eliminating redundancy. If one method of smuggling becomes too popular, he drops it, even if it still works. If it's working for too many people, he's rumored to have said, "It stopped working for me." Many people still think that criminal masterminds operate from bunkers surrounded by goons. So what do you think? Is it possible the most powerful figure in European drug logistics was sitting 2 seats down from you on a flight, quietly reviewing shipping insurance claims? The inner circle isn't about friendship. It's about discretion. If you can't keep your mouth shut, you're out. No threats, no drama, just gone. And when someone does step out of line, tries to claim too much credit, flashes too much cash, or starts asking the wrong questions, they're rotated. Not killed, not punished. Just moved sideways until they fade out of relevance. That's how he avoids the fate of so many other gang leaders. No power struggles, no coups, just constant motion. What's closest to Christy in this period is anonymity within familiarity. He becomes the man everyone assumes they've met, but no one remembers clearly. Some know him as Christopher Vincent, others as the guy with the suitcase. He's always polite, always vague. There's a famous moment, if whisperers count as fame, where he's seated at a boxing match in Spain, not ringside, not in the VIP section, somewhere in the middle, just another spectator. A journalist catches a blurry photo of him. It circulates for a while, then fades. No one can even confirm the date. But what's more interesting is why he's there. Boxing isn't just a personal interest. It's a tool, a platform, a way to integrate with governments, athletes, and licensing bodies. The boxing world becomes a front and a funnel, a place to launder influence as easily as money. He begins investing, quietly, in fighters, sponsoring camps, funding travel, and with it, gaining access to a different echelon of legitimacy. A trainer once said, "I didn't even know he was that Kinahan. I just thought he was a businessman who liked the sport." That's the goal. He doesn't just walk between worlds. He weaves them together. Crime, sport, real estate, logistics, all part of the same narrative, shaped to look like separate stories. This is when authorities across Europe begin to notice a strange phenomenon. The same shipping company shows up in 3 separate investigations, in 3 different countries, connected to 3 different types of contraband. None directly traceable. No overlapping personnel. Just patterns. And every time they dig deeper, the records loop back on themselves. A director listed as deceased, a signature from a lawyer who no longer practices, a shipping firm that dissolved 6 days before a search warrant could be executed. One senior EU official called the Kinahan network the IKEA manual of organized crime. Everything fits perfectly, but good luck figuring out how it got there. And Christy? He's nowhere. Not in the phone records, not in the CCTV, not even in the financial trails. He's not removed. He's designed to be absent. One Europol analyst summarized it best. It's like someone vacuum-sealed their criminal profile. Airtight, sterile. No fingerprints, just motion. He starts moving less physically and more digitally, coordinating through intermediaries who use VPNs, burner laptops, and dead-drop Wi-Fi signals. But even here, he's conservative. Messages are coded not in ciphers, but in mundane phrasing. Talk of shipments, deliveries, and deadlines. Business talk. Corporate noise. What's closest to him now is the algorithm of suspicion. He knows how law enforcement builds cases. He knows how banks flag transactions. He stays 10 steps ahead, not because he's brilliant, but because he's studied boredom long enough to weaponize it. And then, one day, a port official in Belgium retires suddenly. No one notices. But 3 weeks later, a container clears customs in record time. Was that a coincidence? Maybe. But in Christy's world, there are no coincidences, just moving parts. The empire grows, but the spotlight never finds him, because Kinahan isn't interested in power that's seen. He's interested in power that moves unseen and keeps moving. Marbella's sunlit coast glows with opulence. Yachts, penthouses, champagne breakfasts that stretch until lunch. But Christy Kinahan keeps to the shadows of the scene. He's not hiding exactly. He's blending, moving just a few shades paler than the glitz around him. The lifestyle isn't the point. The location is. Spain, especially southern Spain, is a tangle of real estate opportunity and regulatory gray zones. For someone like Kinahan, it's not just convenient, it's ideal. He isn't running nightclubs or laundering money through casinos like a caricature. No, Christy is filing paperwork, flawless paperwork, shell companies in Gibraltar, holding firms in Panama, residential purchases through proxies with legitimate incomes. What's closest to him now is opacity, not secrecy. He's far too meticulous for loose ends. He cultivates a maze, each corridor leading to another layer of red tape. Investigators describe his assets like a kaleidoscope. No matter how long you stare, the pattern keeps shifting. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Between 2000 and 2010, Spain's property market explodes. Billions of euros flow into construction, much of it untraced. Entire resorts are bought, built, and abandoned with minimal oversight. Christy doesn't miss the opportunity. He makes purchases through a real estate consultant who doesn't ask questions. The consultant earns their cut, signs the forms, and disappears, sometimes to new countries, sometimes to new lives. The villas change hands every few years. Tax records are filed. Rent is sometimes collected. But who lives there? No one seems to know. Meanwhile, Christy begins cultivating connections in local bureaucracy. Never directly, always through intermediaries. A lawyer here, a notary there. These aren't bribes. They're relationships. Deliberate, strategic proximity to decision makers. Many people still think that to be a cartel boss, you need a throne room, guards, and an army. So what do you think? Could it be that Christy built his empire from the backseat of a taxi, a cafe in Malaga, or the lobby of a 2-star hotel? One Spanish official, years later, described him as the kind of man you only remember after he's gone. He refines his appearance too. Gone are the jeans and jumpers of Dublin. In Marbella, he becomes neutral. Blazers without logos, muted shirts, shoes that never shine too brightly. He shops in airports, pays in cash, and leaves no loyalty programs behind. What's closest to him during this phase is transience. He rarely stays in one villa for more than a month, not because he's afraid, but because predictability is risk. Even his grocery deliveries are inconsistent, sometimes ordered under one name, sometimes another. The Kinahan network stretches further now. Eastern Europe, Dubai, the Canary Islands. Each cell operates semi-independently. Christy doesn't call meetings. He sends expectations, clear, precise, and always obeyed. There's a rumor about this era that Christy once held a conference, not in a darkened room, but at a beach resort under the guise of a wellness retreat. 15 men arrived. None used real names. They drank juice, wore sunglasses, and by the end of the week, realigned an entire drug corridor from Morocco to Antwerp, all without a single mention of cocaine. His methods are not just efficient, they're poetic in their restraint. Containers move, money flows, nothing touches him. What's closest to Christy now are options, citizenship applications in several countries, legal teams on retainer across 3 continents, a network so fluid that if any part fails, 3 others compensate immediately. Interpol begins to tighten its grip. Intelligence agencies in the UK, the Netherlands, and Spain quietly start whispering his name in classified meetings. But they can't agree on how to pursue him. Each jurisdiction has a piece, but no one has the full picture. In one leaked report, an agent wrote, "His organization behaves more like an algorithm than a cartel." That's intentional. Kinahan doesn't want personality at the core. He wants process. Even family is compartmentalized. His sons are brought in, slowly, not through nepotism, but through grooming. Daniel, especially, begins shadowing parts of the empire, but only parts. Christy remains the architect. At one point, Daniel is spotted in a hotel in Dubai, greeting a man tied to a South American export firm. Christy isn't present, but somehow the details are handled perfectly. This is how Christy trains, not by instruction, but by pressure. What's closest to him now is distance with precision. He's not in the room, but the room is acting exactly as he would. Still, danger looms. A few seizures in the Netherlands, a leak in Antwerp. A runner gets careless and triggers a trail. Christy doesn't panic. He recalibrates. That route is dropped. The port contact disappears, moved, retired, replaced. There's a saying among his operatives, one wrong shipment and he erases the map. And that's exactly what happens. One day, a container is compromised. The paperwork doesn't match. Authorities seize it. The drugs are found. It's a hit, but not a fatal one, because Christy already has 3 alternate corridors running. And the compromised one? Already wiped clean. Property is sold, phones destroyed, companies dissolved. What's left? Nothing. Just a file full of disconnected facts and a few blurry CCTV shots of a man in a blazer buying coffee. The authorities are chasing a ghost. But the ghost is building condos in Portugal now, under a different name, through a different lawyer, with a different plan. And he's still not yelling, still not running, just moving. One step ahead always. Christy Kinahan doesn't change names because he's afraid. He changes them because identity, to him, is just another logistics problem. By the early 2010s, the man known across whispers and warrants has become a ghost with paperwork. Christopher Vincent, Christy Kinahan, Daniel's dad. Each name is a layer, a lens, a redirect. But at the center, silence. What's closest to him now is administrative invisibility. He doesn't just avoid detection, He builds life structures that never draw attention in the first place. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Around this time, the European Union begins enhancing data sharing between police forces, customs, and financial institutions. More names on more watch lists, more coordination. But Christy had already shifted. His operations now move under functions, not people. He's no longer the man controlling everything directly. He's the principle encoded into how things are done. His proxies know the routine. His instructions are systems, not orders, like a recipe. Just follow each step. One customs officer in Portugal recounts intercepting a container flagged by U.S. intelligence. It contained furniture, perfect paperwork, nothing found. But the routing? Suspicious. Spain to Panama to Belgium to Ireland? That's Kinahan logic. Make it so strange, it feels over-explained. Many people still think that with enough pressure, any criminal empire cracks under its own weight. So what do you think? Could it be that Kinahan's greatest strength was designing an empire meant to run under stress? It's during this time that his name begins entering high-level law enforcement briefings. Interpol, Europol, the DEA, the UK's National Crime Agency. But the problem persists. No one can see him. There are no phone taps, no surveillance photos worth printing. Just long trails of legal documents that always seem to resolve into nothing. A trust in Malta registered to a man who died 2 years ago. A business in Dubai whose only listed employee works as a translator. A plane ticket bought under a name that doesn't exist, but boarded nonetheless. And what's closest to Christy in this phase? Flight paths and safe zones. He favors Dubai now. The Emirates are a different sort of place. Expats, closed financial systems, no extradition treaties with Ireland or the UK. The architecture screams surveillance, but the legal structure whispers immunity. In Dubai, Christy becomes even harder to trace. The villas are luxurious but unlisted. The licenses are real but obscured. He exists in air-conditioned rooms behind mirrored glass, talking softly over coffee with men who don't blink when someone mentions 20 million euros. This is where the operation crystallizes. Daniel, his son, begins stepping forward. And unlike Christy, Daniel doesn't mind the occasional photo. A boxing match here, a business summit there. It's a generational difference, and possibly the network's greatest weakness. Christy stays behind, not just literally, philosophically. He doesn't want his name in press releases. He doesn't want fame. He wants infrastructure, and boxing becomes a crucial part of that. Not as a sport, as a stage. What's closest to Christy now isn't crime, it's credibility. Boxing gives him access to embassies, regulators, billionaires. Fighters move internationally. Events cross borders. Money shifts hands with plausible explanations. And Christy? He sponsors silence. There's a moment that captures it all. A major boxing title fight in the Middle East. Cameras flash, celebrities pose. Somewhere in the background, Daniel is spotted. Christy isn't. But behind that event, rumors say Christy was the one who secured the venue, the funding, the safety. One promoter later said, "I never met him, but everything we needed was just ready." That's the Kinahan way. No presence, just performance. Still, the heat intensifies. Governments begin comparing notes. The US starts circling. Journalists grow bolder. The Irish media starts using phrases like international kingpin. And for the first time, the word cartel becomes publicly attached to his name. But Christy doesn't flinch. He adapts. He pulls back even further. Meetings happen less. Messages go through 3 intermediaries, and yet the business continues. What's closest to him now is trust by design. If someone needs Christy's approval, it arrives indirectly. A signature on a contract, a single word in an email, a wire transfer with a fractionally altered timestamp. That's all it takes. There's a persistent myth that during this period, Christy rewrites a manual, a literal one, on how his network should run if he ever disappears. Some say it's stored in an encrypted drive. Others claim it's memorized by one man who lives in Monaco under a different name. Whether true or not, it doesn't matter, because the system works. Law enforcement grows increasingly frustrated. They freeze assets. They detain associates. They issue red notices. But Christy? He's always one villa ahead, one shell company deeper, one private jet flight earlier, and while officials shout his name at press conferences, Christy sits in silence, likely watching the coverage with a calm that unnerves even his allies, because he's not worried about being famous. He's worried about being found useful. By the mid-2010s, Christy Kinahan has built something more durable than a cartel. He's built a myth wearing the skin of a corporation. The empire moves like a shadow system, parallel to the legal world. It mimics bureaucracy. It uses signatures, shipments, spreadsheets. But none of it points back to him directly. It's like a ghost learned accounting. What's closest to Christy now is removal. Not from society, but from exposure. He isn't hiding underground. He's attending meetings in penthouse lounges, moving funds through holding companies registered in Jersey, Luxembourg, and Cyprus. There's a mainstream historical fact here. By this time, the use of shell corporations to obscure beneficial ownership has reached its peak globally. Christy is not just exploiting this structure. He's perfecting it. He builds networks that double as legal frameworks. Lawyers in London draft contracts. Agents in the Caribbean sign them. Courier services transport the ink-signed originals to banks in Liechtenstein. It's all real. It's all traceable. It just doesn't lead anywhere. And still, containers are moving. Some with drugs. Others just as decoys. Each one another line in his logistical fugue. His name doesn't appear on ownership documents, but it echoes in conference rooms. If someone wants to move weight across continents, his is the invisible hand guiding the paperwork. Many people still think of criminal power in terms of territory, turf. So what do you think? Is it possible Christy's only true territory is ambiguity? He becomes harder to find than ever. His legal residency is uncertain. His income streams are declared in fractions. When journalists try to trace his assets, they hit dead ends. Companies close before questions arrive. And through it all, boxing becomes louder. Daniel Kinahan steps forward, shaking hands with champions, managing fighters, giving quiet interviews. His role becomes publicly associated with fight promotion. But with it comes scrutiny. And where scrutiny lives, Christy departs. What's closest to Christy now is silhouetted influence. He's the name behind the man in front. There's a story, unverified but chilling in its clarity. A major boxing event is about to fall through due to contract disputes. No one knows what happened, but 24 hours later, the paperwork is resolved. Daniel looks relieved. A promoter smiles. Flights are booked again. No threats, no yelling, just resolution. And somewhere, maybe in Dubai, maybe in Doha, Christy closes a folder and orders another espresso. By now, international agencies have noticed the pattern. The U.S. starts investigating. So do Irish authorities, more determined than ever. Europol tags the Kinahan network as highly structured. But structure is not a flaw. It's its defense. There's even a moment, recorded in Irish parliamentary transcripts, where Christie's name is discussed not as folklore, but as a figure central to organized European crime. Politicians demand action, but action against what? A man no one can find, who owns nothing and controls everything. Interpol issues red notices. The U.S. Treasury starts compiling dossiers, but nothing sticks, because Christie hasn't built an empire in the shadows. He's built it inside gray space, the land between legitimate business and unprovable suspicion. He doesn't threaten, he doesn't need to. His consistency is its own kind of warning. Even those working 3 levels removed know the rule. Don't attract attention, ever. And so, some drop out. They get sloppy. They want fame. Christie lets them go. Quietly. No messages, just silence. They're replaced without ripple. What's closest to Christie during this time is redundancy. He ensures that no one link, not even himself, can collapse the chain. If caught, the couriers don't know the handlers. The handlers don't know the financiers. The financiers think they're investing in consulting. It's elegant, exhausting, and so far impenetrable. Then comes the 2016 Regency Hotel shooting, a brutal daylight ambush at a boxing weigh-in in Dublin. It sends shockwaves through the underworld, and though Christie isn't there, the consequences ripple toward him. The feud it triggers exposes weaknesses, names, affiliations, associates get targeted, families get drawn in. It's the moment the media finally, confidently attaches the word Kinahan to the word cartel. So what does Christie do? He vanishes further. Daniel takes more of the public heat. Christie begins tightening the back end, pulling funds, moving assets, erasing names from ledgers. He doesn't make statements. He doesn't retaliate publicly. But investigators notice something chilling. Shipping routes change overnight. Shell companies dissolve within hours. Passports, legally held, get canceled or renewed under new aliases. It's as though he's shedding a skin. What's closest to Christie now is contingency. Every move has a backup. Every name, an exit. Every route, a shadow route. He leans even harder into Dubai. There, surrounded by the polished glass of financial districts and the hush of high-rise living, he finds the perfect operating theater. There's no crime scene here, no turf to mark, just sky and silence. He shops at supermarkets, works from encrypted devices, moves between towers where no one makes eye contact in elevators. And the containers? Still moving. Every week, somewhere in Europe, one of his invisible threads tightens. A port signs off. A ledger balances. A transfer clears. Christie's not in the photo, but his hand is steady on the lens. Christy Kinahan doesn't like mess. He never has. So when the Regency Hotel shooting disrupts the carefully balanced quiet he spent decades building, he reacts. Not with rage, but with restraint. He doesn't do vendettas. He does redirection. The feud between the Kinahans and the Hutch family draws an uncomfortable kind of spotlight. Murders multiply. The streets of Dublin, Marbella, and even Amsterdam tremble with reprisal and whispers. Media outlets print diagrams of supposed loyalties. Authorities draw circles around his name on whiteboards. And Christie? He pulls the plug on visibility. What's closest to him now is disassociation. He doesn't flee. That would imply fear. He restructures. Several low-level operatives suddenly relocate to Malta, Cyprus, the Emirates. Shipping companies shut down. New ones spring up in their place. Offshore accounts are zeroed out, and new accounts, opened by entirely different individuals, begin absorbing funds. He's always preferred movement to confrontation. If a node in the network draws heat, he detaches it, not out of cruelty, out of protocol. There's a mainstream historical fact here. After the Regency shooting, Irish law enforcement increases international cooperation tenfold. Operation Lamp and the Garda, National Drugs and Organized Crime Bureau, begin systematically freezing assets, disrupting supply lines, and making seizures that would have been impossible a decade earlier, but they're chasing fragments. By the time one asset is frozen, Christy has rerouted 4 others. Like a digital shadow, always one step behind the light, and while Daniel remains in headlines, showing up at fights, getting photographed near high-risk names, Christy doubles down on his silence. He stops using phones altogether, insiders say. Communications happen through secure channels, physical couriers, or time-delayed message chains. Even his legal advisors are sometimes unsure of where he is. Many people still think that powerful criminals assert themselves when challenged. So, what do you think? Could it be that Christy's real power comes from his ability to erase himself on command? He becomes a rumor in his own empire. Not everyone believes he's still running things. Some think Daniel has fully taken over. Others suggest Christy is retired, or even dead. But strange things happen. A frozen asset in Gibraltar is suddenly unfrozen, legally. A dormant shell company reactivates and purchases shipping rights in Tunisia. A lawyer representing an unrelated real estate dispute drops the case just days before a critical hearing, citing internal reassignment. And none of it connects directly to Christy. But the style, the elegance, the timing feels familiar. What's closest to him now is misdirection. In the months after the Regency incident, Christy reportedly reconfigures everything. The hierarchy becomes flatter. Each unit gets autonomy. Smaller teams, shorter contact chains. If one cell is compromised, the others keep operating. This is when the network starts behaving less like a cartel and more like a modular economy. Each group, logistics, finance, street-level import, export, and legal defense, operates semi-independently, bound only by protocol. It's less mafia, more decentralized startup. One investigator called it the Airbnb of crime. No headquarters, just alignment. In Dubai, Christy remains unseen, but the benefits of his design are everywhere. Fighters fly into Abu Dhabi with no questions asked. Freight lanes open up through less scrutinized ports. Bank wires slip through financial review because they mimic tourism flows, and the boxing world? Still part of the game. Daniel pushes deeper, aligning with fighters, managers, and sponsors. Christy's not at ringside, but his influence shadows the gloves. What's closest to him now is adaptation. He's not steering every shipment, but he's guiding the culture. Even those who've never met him begin mimicking his methods. Speak little. Document everything. Trust the system. Avoid ego. Christy becomes less of a boss and more of a blueprint, but not everyone follows the rules. A few new recruits chase clout. One flaunts wealth in Marbella. Another posts cryptic photos on social media. Christy reacts quietly, but decisively. They disappear, not violently, just out of the ecosystem. Their connections sever, their assignments rerouted, their roles folded into others. The system digests mistakes, not punishes them. And through all this, law enforcement keeps pushing. Interpol names him explicitly. Europol follows. The United States grows louder. Still, no arrest, no court appearance, no mugshot. One theory is that he hasn't made a mistake. Another? that the world hasn't yet learned how to prosecute someone whose power lies not in ownership, but in organization. He's not hoarding cash. He's controlling direction. He's not commanding people. He's conditioning behavior. And while news headlines declare manhunts and task forces, Christy watches from silence. No retaliation, no press statements, just a rebalancing. And what's closest to him, always, is the knowledge that in the end, the quiet ones outlast the ones who scream. By now, Christy Kinahan isn't so much a name as he is an absence that holds shape. Law enforcement knows him. Journalists chase him. But no one touches him. He's become a negative space in the international underworld, a man-sized void that continues to move product, shape alliances, and frustrate entire agencies. What's closest to Christy now is design without presence. He doesn't need to be in a room to control it. His presence is embedded in the habits of his network, in the vocabulary his operatives use, in the silence they carry like doctrine. There's a mainstream historical fact here. By the late 2010s, global anti-money laundering protocols become more aggressive. Banks tighten KYC, know your customer rules. Cross-border data sharing becomes faster. But Christy saw it coming. His system was built to function without central accounts, without long-term paper trails. Instead, he leans on ecosystems, friendly nations with opaque financial systems, mid-sized ports with underfunded inspections, cryptocurrencies used not to hoard value, but to convert and disappear it. He adapts not by innovating, but by subtracting. No big transfers, no sudden moves. His empire flows like groundwater, silent, steady, reshaping continents one container at a time. And what's closest to Christy during this phase? Plausible deniability, polished to an art form. He surrounds himself with people who have no reason to be suspected. Lawyers with clean records, consultants who bill like accountants, associates whose only crime is convenience. Daniel, meanwhile, walks the thin wire between legitimacy and suspicion. His face becomes better known. The boxing world begins pulling away, not because they know the truth, but because the rumors won't go away. Still, Christy doesn't intervene directly. He lets the public heat burn around Daniel. He stays in the deeper water. Many people still think that Christy must be losing control by this point. So, what do you think? Could it be that losing visibility was the final stage of control? Because everything now behaves like he would. When assets are frozen, replacements activate. When routes are closed, alternates come online. When names are exposed, new ones slide into place, ready. The architecture is the legacy. Christy doesn't have to run the business anymore. The business runs like he's still watching, and maybe he is. Some say he's in Dubai, still sipping black coffee and reading trade data. Others think he's moved east, to Singapore perhaps, or even Georgia. Somewhere with shadows, but good infrastructure. What's closest to him now is global ambiguity. He's past being a European ghost. He's a figure with no fixed point, only access. There's a rumor that during this time, a rival crew tried to intercept one of his shipments. They failed, not because of violence, because they couldn't locate the shipment. It never existed, at least not on the manifests they could read. Christy had moved past ports and crates. He was now in the processes, the insurance filings, the customs protocols, the port union negotiations. If someone tried to block him, he didn't fight. He rerouted. This is when financial investigators begin to realize the full scope of the operation. Not just drugs, but cargo, real estate, financial consulting, logistics companies that handle both legal and illegal freight with equal ease. It becomes impossible to separate his crime from his commerce. That's the genius. He's no longer a smuggler. He's a facilitator, and that makes him hard to prosecute. The drugs belong to someone else. The ship belongs to a third party. The container was leased. The driver was contracted. The invoice is legitimate. He's nowhere and everywhere in the fine print. What's closest to Christy now is layering, not just of identity, but of purpose. Every action serves two masters. Every transaction can be explained in two ways. Even if he were caught, prosecutors would have to build a case with nothing but implication. A nearly impossible task against a man who's been erasing fingerprints since fax machines were new. And then, in 2022, it happens. The US government steps in. A press conference. A bounty. Millions of dollars offered for information on Christy Kinahan and his sons. Suddenly the quiet becomes thunderous. His name is everywhere. News tickers. Podcasts, panels of experts trying to explain how someone so notorious could be so untouched. Interpol ramps up, sanctions drop. Asset freezes stack like dominoes. Airlines are warned. Banks are briefed. Boxing promoters flee. And Christy, he doesn't release a statement. Of course not. He simply adjusts. What's closest to him now is containment. He compresses, tightens the circles, narrows the contacts. No more favors, no more expansions, just defense. He erases what can be erased, reinforces what must remain, and waits, because Christy has always known that storms pass, even when they carry badges and press passes. So what does he do? He listens, he watches, he lets Daniel absorb the noise, and somewhere, in a country that won't extradite, he reviews his blueprint one more time, just in case the world has finally caught up. But not yet, not today. The bounty from the United States shifts the game. When the U.S. Treasury and State Department name Christy Kinahan publicly and attach millions in reward money to his capture, it's not just a law enforcement tactic. It's a global signal. Overnight, Christy transforms from a quiet whisper to an international target. But he doesn't run. He doesn't panic. Because Christy Kinahan has never built anything he can't walk away from. What's closest to him now is containment through resilience. Instead of collapsing, the network folds in on itself like a turtle shell. The exposed pieces, Daniel's public ventures, the visible shipping companies, the boxing affiliations, are sacrificed, allowed to burn under the spotlight. But the real architecture? It stays intact. Because unlike many underworld figures, Christy never built his empire to rely on charisma. He built it to survive him. There's a mainstream historical fact here. The U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, sanctions the Kinahan Group in 2022, freezing U.S.-linked assets and issuing global warnings to banks, airlines, and financial institutions. That changes everything. Overnight, dozens of European banks begin quietly closing accounts connected to even loosely affiliated shell firms. Flights are monitored. Phone lines go dead. Associates vanish from social media. But Christy? Christy's footprint is already too faint. Investigators pull at threads, but each one leads to a dead end. An expired visa, a closed firm, a contract written under a name that hasn't existed in 2 years. What's closest to Christy now is dislocation. He's not tied to places anymore. Not tied to assets. He's tied to systems, still running, still intact, still moving goods across borders using infrastructure untouched by public accusation. Many people still think that a public bounty is a death sentence for a criminal empire. So what do you think? Could it be that for Christy Kinahan, it was just the next phase of decentralization? There's a theory that around this time, he begins selling off parts of the machine. Not out of desperation, but as a business pivot. Certain routes, too hot, are handed over to smaller regional crews. Logistics infrastructure is repackaged as legitimate consulting. Some port operations are even rebranded under environmental import export covers. If Christy's losing ground, he's choosing which ground to lose. And still, containers move. Smaller maybe, more discreet. But they move. In Dubai, where he's believed to be operating, life goes on. The laws offer him protection, as long as he doesn't cause embarrassment. He's not wanted there, and that's what matters. What's closest to him now is routine disguised as reinvention. He appears, according to whispers, in places no one expects. Serbia, Kazakhstan, South Africa, all legal, all covered by legitimate passports. His appearance changes subtly with time. Beard trimmed shorter, glasses occasionally swapped for contacts. There's no dramatic disguise, just absence of pattern. He stops appearing in the edges of boxing promotions, stops leaving fingerprints on real estate. Even the people who once called him boss now say, "We haven't heard from him in years." But they follow the routines anyway. That's the mark of a system, not a man. Investigators from multiple countries hold private meetings in The Hague, Geneva, Brussels. They trade intel, align warrants, sketch the last known coordinates. But what they're chasing is vapor. Even his name, at this point, is layered. Some documents list a variation of his birth name. Others cite aliases long since retired. His legal representation is vague, often working through firms that serve thousands of clients. What's closest to Christy now is legacy through ritual, the way files are labeled, the format of an invoice, the cadence of a shipping contract. Each carries a fingerprint not of a man, but of a method. And the Kinahan name? It still stirs fear, still commands respect. But Christy no longer carries it like a banner. He's handed it off to Daniel, to the system, to the myth. He doesn't attend meetings. He doesn't call shots. But somehow, things still move the way he'd want them to. One investigative journalist once said, "It's like the man taught the wind how to move." The bounty hangs heavy. Interpol watches. The DEA leans in. Even MI5 nods its interest. But none of them can pinpoint anything, and every time a press article mentions his name, Christy likely reads it and smiles. Not out of arrogance, out of confirmation. He's still free, still unseen, because the true criminal isn't the one who breaks the law. It's the one who redesigns the game so thoroughly, no one knows which laws were ever broken. Years pass, and the headlines grow quieter. Not because Christy Kinahan is forgotten, but because the news cycle tires of ghosts. His name fades from daily mention, though it still hovers in backroom briefings and sealed intelligence memos. No arrest, no clear photo, no slip-up to feed the fire. What's closest to Christy now is mastered absence. He's no longer just hidden. He's become part of the landscape. Not visible, but present. Like humidity, like pressure. Felt, not seen. The world keeps shifting. Governments change. Drug policies evolve. But the quiet corridors of commerce remain. Ports humming. Cargo ships leaving at dawn. Customs officers blinking through barcodes. And in that flow, somewhere, Christy's architecture still pulses. The Kinahan name remains active in law enforcement circles, but it becomes harder to describe accurately. Is it still a cartel? Is it a family? A corporation? A shell of what it was? Or something sharper than ever, just quieter? And Christy? He's either in the center of it or nowhere near it, depending on who you ask. Many people still think time erodes empires. So what do you think? Can something built on shadows ever be weathered by the light? What's closest to him now is selective silence. If Christy speaks, it's only to a handful of people. And if he acts, the ripples are slow, deliberate, and often untraceable. Investigators remain obsessed, but their targets are now digital. Bitcoin flows, satellite traces, corporate filings in remote islands. Nothing ties back cleanly, and while Daniel faces more public scrutiny, Christy's role becomes philosophical. He's not issuing daily commands, he's existing as a doctrine. It's said that anyone who joins the network is first taught the rules. No bragging, no improvisation, no unnecessary contact. Stay useful, stay quiet, stay out of sight. Christy may not teach them himself. He doesn't have to. His silence is taught like gospel. In early 2025, authorities hint at new breakthroughs, more sanctioned companies, more visas revoked, and still, Christy remains untouched. He may be in Oman, or Montenegro, or walking a beach in Mauritius at sunrise, the tide smooth beneath his feet. A burner phone left in a drawer 100 kilometers away. The people who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know. It's been decades now since Dublin saw him as a teenage schemer. And yet, somehow, Christy Kinahan still exists in the folds between law and commerce. A figure of restraint. A man who outlived his mistakes by never leaving fingerprints on them. And what's closest to him now is legacy. Refined, not built on bodies, built on patience, on systems, on watching others crumble under weight. He learned to float above. He isn't feared like Escobar. He isn't loud like Gotti. He's something harder to chase. He's still out there. And now, as our story slows, feel your breath steady. Let the weight of the names fade. Let the hush return. Close your eyes if they aren't already. Let the echo of distant ports, of containers creaking in the dark, drift out to sea. No shouting, no sirens. Just the quiet shuffle of paperwork. A man closing a laptop. A light flicking off. And in some high window, across some dusk-shadowed skyline, Christy Kinahan leans back in his chair, not triumphant, just present. Still quiet, still gone, still there. Take a deep breath now. Let the names, the dates, the heavy silences all fall away. You've followed a path laid in whisper, built with caution, wrapped in years. Let your body soften into the mattress or the cushion beneath you. Loosen your jaw. Rest your hands. Let gravity take over. You don't need to remember every container, every name change, every quiet pivot in the dark. They weren't there to burden you. They were just a map. A slow, careful map through a world that never wanted to be found. The sea still moves. The ports still breathe. Somewhere out there, men still follow a code they never wrote, whispered by someone they've never met. But here, in your space, everything is still. Everything waits. The light outside might still glow. A fan might hum. But your thoughts can settle now. Let them drift like mist around a distant harbor. Let the tide pull them gently from view. There's nothing more you need to do tonight. No more routes to trace. No more questions to ask. You're safe. You're still. Let the hush wrap around you. Let the rhythm of sleep take its slow first steps. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond the quiet, someone like Christy Kinahan walks through another door, unreadable and alone. But you don't need to follow. You've made it this far, and now it's time to rest. Good night. Sleep has a strange way of revealing what the waking world obscures. While most of the world moves on, Christy Kinahan remains somewhere just outside the frame, clear in outline, blurry in detail. His story doesn't end. It slows, fades, reshapes. But even in the stillness, the machinery hums, because Christy wasn't just building an empire. He was rehearsing an idea. that control isn't about presence. It's about creating a structure so disciplined it can function without its creator, and that's exactly what happens. What's closest to Christy now is remote integrity. His systems still operate, not because he pushes buttons, but because others believe in the way he built the buttons. The routes are memorized, the methods internalized. Like monks repeating ancient scripture, his people follow the rhythm he designed years ago. There's a mainstream historical fact here. In recent years, global law enforcement increasingly targets systems, banking frameworks, telecom infrastructures, encrypted platforms, not just individuals. But Christy saw that coming too. His answer? Keep the operation fluid, minimal tech reliance, maximize plausible deniability. His greatest innovation wasn't in smuggling cocaine, it was in separating every step from the next. By now, even his inner circle may not know where he is, and that's not a problem. That's a feature. Many people still think a leader's absence means weakness. So what do you think? Could it be that by designing a self-healing network, Christy made himself irrelevant, and therefore uncatchable? His public identity shrinks until it's little more than a red-slashed name on a most wanted list. His fingerprints are gone. His voice is unheard. But his movement? Still everywhere. Consider this. A shipping firm in Morocco changes hands. A lawyer in Panama registers a holding company for a real estate venture. A warehouse in Poland begins receiving crates labeled organic supplies. All legal, all forgettable. But in the tiny, quiet gaps between those transactions, that's where Christy lives now. What's closest to him in this phase is displacement by design, not running, not hiding, but building rooms he never has to enter, because others have learned to turn on the lights exactly the way he would. There's a quote often misattributed to him. The perfect empire is one that doesn't need its emperor, and maybe that's not something he said aloud. Maybe it's just something his work implies, because now, in 2025, even the idea of capturing him feels less like justice and more like chasing the blueprint of smoke. Interpol updates their files. New photos are circulated. A few are computer-generated guesses at how he might look now. Graying hair, thinner frame, glasses. But no one knows. No one really knows. Some believe he's mentoring someone new. Others think he's exited entirely, living out his days on a yacht without internet. But then a pattern emerges again. Another route that follows his logic. A ledger entry too clean. A company that mirrors his favorite shell structure. What's closest to Christy now is the absence of finality. His career has no big bust, no courtroom breakdown, no climactic takedown scene. He didn't fall. He diluted. And while authorities still pursue the Kinahan name, what they're really chasing is methodology. The principle. The way of being invisible through order. It's said, by those who would know, that his greatest talent wasn't smuggling drugs or hiding money. It was teaching discipline, not the kind enforced with threats. The kind that seeps in through silence, that trains a person to look over both shoulders even when alone, that builds reflexes out of quiet repetition. That kind of leadership doesn't vanish when the leader goes quiet. It lingers. And so, the network breathes. In Dublin, in Dubai, in Warsaw, in port towns with tired cranes and blinking security lights. The Kinahan way continues, not because Christy is calling the shots, but because the shots don't need to be called anymore. Everyone already knows what to do. That's what's truly closest to Christy now. A world that runs like his mind, quiet, predictable, precise, and somewhere out there, on a balcony above a street no one is watching, Christy Kinahan lights a cigarette or stirs his coffee, watching the sun slide into the horizon, still not speaking, still not photographed, still not caught, but still somehow moving the pieces. The deeper Christy Kinahan disappears, the louder the speculation grows. In law enforcement briefings, his name is circled in red. In cartel analyses, he's referred to only as CK. And in the darker corners of Europe's logistics underworld, his legacy has become less man and more manual. But Christy never wanted fame. Fame is unstable. Fame invites entropy. What's closest to Christy now is silhouetted governance, a position of power so abstract, most of the people who obey its logic don't know they're following a man. They're following a system, and the system still works. There's a mainstream historical fact here. In the 2020s, criminal networks increasingly mimic global businesses. They use third-party logistics providers, blockchain-based finance, outsourced customer service, even marketing. Christy saw this coming before most. While other groups fought for physical territory, he built digital lanes and procedural dominance. Many people still think of drug cartels as jungle labs and armed convoys. So what do you think? Could it be that the modern kingpins are those who operate from boardrooms, not bunkers? Christie's logistics blueprint is still being implemented across Europe. It shows up in seizure reports from Germany, in customs irregularities from Portugal, in shipping delays from West Africa, not because Christie sent them, but because his pattern lives on. What's closest to him now is influence through automation. At least 3 companies that authorities tried to shut down reappeared under new names within weeks. Same registered offices, same directors, different logos, same flow. A Belgian journalist once compared it to squeezing a sponge. The water disappears, but the sponge is still there. Quiet. Waiting. Interpol continues circulating his name. New bounty posters are printed, updated with slightly aged renderings. But he's no longer a man in motion. He's the algorithm behind motion. In Dubai, the rumors grow colder. No new sightings, no digital traces. Some say he's moved to Central Asia. Others insist he's living under state protection in a small Gulf nation. But the most interesting possibility? That he no longer needs a location. That his operation, like a properly tuned watch, ticks on without needing the watchmaker. What's closest to Christie now is architecture that forgets its architect. Daniel continues to draw fire. Press stories grow more detailed. Tax records are analyzed. Associates questioned. The boxing world collapses inward on itself, ashamed, rebranding. But Christie doesn't issue a defense. He doesn't write an open letter. Doesn't send a lawyer to deny. He lets it happen, because from the beginning, he planned for replacement. Not just his own, but the structure's adaptability to new hosts, new faces. Even if Daniel falls, the blueprint remains. And if it all vanishes, Christie loses nothing. He's built nothing in his name. This is what investigators find so maddening. He's been at the center of something enormous for decades, but arresting him might not change a single shipment. He created a cartel that doesn't behave like a cartel. No loyalty, no ceremony, just function. Like a multinational logistics company that also happens to move drugs. What's closest to Christie now is entropy management. He knows systems decay. He designed his to regenerate. Small failures don't cripple the whole. Informants can't name more than 2 other links. Every step recorded and destroyed. Every risk distributed. There's a rumor, planted perhaps, or maybe true, that Christie once told an associate, "If someone hands you a phone and says, 'Christie's on the line,' hang up. That's how you know it's not me." And that's the final puzzle. He spent so long building silence. It's now the only language he trusts. Years ago, the idea of capturing him seemed urgent. Now it feels academic, like arresting the last surviving architect of a cathedral. The building stands whether he's there or not, and yet, somewhere, perhaps through a secure signal, or a carefully folded piece of paper delivered by hand, Christy still receives updates, not daily, but enough to know which ports are too hot, which aliases are expired, which routes have changed. What's closest to him now is the drift between relevance and reverence. He's no longer central, but he's still honored in silence, in systems, in rituals that bear his signature but not his name. And so he moves through the world in absence, like steam, like rumor, like the faint perfume left in a corridor after someone's walked through. He is, as one Europol analyst put it, the man who vanished into his own design, still free, still nowhere, still somehow ahead. There's a phrase that circulates quietly among the more experienced drug investigators in Europe. Christy doesn't vanish, he evaporates. And by the late 2020s, that evaporation is nearly complete. Christy Kinahan has not been seen publicly in years. No verifiable photos, no confirmed locations, not even a leaked voice note. He exists only in the minds of analysts and the memories of men who once worked beside or beneath him. But his system? Still breathing, still pivoting, still productive. What's closest to Christy now is operational folklore. He's become a kind of mythological efficiency, like a ghost engineer who left behind schematics that others now use to build empires. The blueprints are whispered between smugglers, copied by newer syndicates, repackaged by rivals who probably don't even realize where the structure originated. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Law enforcement in Europe and the US has increasingly focused on dismantling infrastructure rather than personalities. Task forces now hunt bank servers, logistics algorithms, supply chains. But Christie's architecture, like a spider web, was always meant to hold even if the spider left, and Levy did, or at least that's what it seems like. Many people still think that a criminal enterprise without a visible leader will inevitably fracture. So, what do you think? Could it be that Christie's greatest trick wasn't surviving exposure, but removing the need for himself entirely? Because now, the Kinahan network behaves less like a family and more like a program. Routes operate like scheduled code. Decision trees replace meetings. Risk is assessed by spreadsheets, not intuition. Each operative follows the rules, even if they don't remember who first wrote them. What's closest to Christy now is functional immortality. In West Africa, customs officers seize a container and discover a secondary chamber welded beneath the chassis. Textbook Kinahan design. In Eastern Europe, a shell company is found tied to 3 others, all of which route back to an accounting firm dissolved a year prior. Another Kinahan hallmark. In Latin America, rumors persist of a European facilitator who once visited Colombia with nothing but a USB stick and a translator. Was it Christy? Or someone trained by someone trained by someone who knew his methods? It doesn't matter. The fingerprints are long gone, and what of Daniel? He continues to draw international attention. His name appears on sanction lists. He releases the occasional statement denying everything. He moves like a man still learning how to wear the spotlight Christy always avoided. Some say he's still in contact with his father. Others think Christy has fully withdrawn. But either way, Daniel's heat protects the older man. A buffer, intentional or not, because Christy knew that visibility was a form of currency. And like all currency, it loses value with overuse. He trained his systems to avoid that entirely. What's closest to him now is post-identity control. The network doesn't need Christie's face. It runs on timing, on discretion, on a decade-old understanding that anyone can be replaced except the rhythm. There's an unconfirmed story about a former Kinahan logistics handler arrested in Belgium. When pressed to reveal who gave the final order, he shrugged and said, "No one gives the final order. The system does. And that's it, isn't it? Christy Kinahan didn't build an empire. He built a pattern. And patterns, unlike people, don't die. They replicate. He was always more engineer than gangster, more conductor than king. Now, in the twilight of his public relevance, he's still running the quietest long game of all. Not evasion, not domination, continuation. What's closest to Christy these days may not even be crime anymore. Maybe he walks open-air markets under another name. Maybe he mentors younger operatives over untraceable channels. Maybe he sits quietly in some sun-washed courtyard, sipping mint tea, watching the world spin, knowing that no matter what happens now, he's already written himself into the margins, irremovable, unnamed, but always there. And if they do catch him someday, if the pieces align and a lucky trace leads to a final door, it won't be a moment of triumph. It'll be a museum discovery, an artifact, a fossil of a man who redefined how shadows are cast. Because by then, the rhythm he set in motion will still be pulsing elsewhere, indifferent to headlines. And Christy, he'll smile just once, not because he got away, but because he no longer has to. Somewhere between legacy and legend, Christy Kinahan becomes less a man on the run and more a rhythm that can't be stopped. His face, if anyone remembers it, has likely softened with time. But his influence? That's still angular, sharp in its precision, humming through networks he built decades ago. What's closest to Christy now is strategic irrelevance, not in the sense that he's unimportant, but in the sense that the system no longer requires him to function. He's irrelevant to its daily grind because he planned for it that way. That's the point. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Most criminal organizations suffer collapse once their leader is removed, whether through death, betrayal, or capture. But Kinahan's structure defies that arc. It behaves more like a multinational business where the founder retires and the brand keeps growing. Even now, in 2025, the occasional customs bust echoes his methods. Not because Christy is involved directly, but because the systems are still in place. An air freight company in the Balkans quietly changes ownership, yet the paperwork matches an old Kinahan format. A maritime logistics firm operating out of Morocco files insurance in a fashion eerily similar to Christie's older offshore shells. Many people still think that all networks degrade without central authority. So what do you think? Could it be that Christie's final achievement was to make himself obsolete without ever losing control, because there's something deeply intentional about how he disappeared? Not panicked, not chaotic, but like a man following the final steps in a long, practiced exit strategy. It's been years now since any public sighting. The U.S. bounty remains unclaimed. Europol's files grow stale. The Gardaí in Dublin continue their surveillance efforts, but even they admit there's no footprint, just echoes. And what's closest to Christy now is institutional memory, not inside law enforcement, inside the world he left behind. There's a younger generation of operatives across Europe, many of whom never met him, yet they replicate his rules, use his templates, speak in clipped, cautious phrases. They've never shaken his hand, but they follow his lead. Christy has become a code word, a style, a cautionary tale. In elite organized crime circles, when someone proposes something too loud, too fast, too sloppy, the response is often, "Christy wouldn't approve." It's not a threat, it's a standard. What's closest to Christy now is quiet calibration. He may still tweak things, perhaps once a year, perhaps not at all, maybe through a nod to a lawyer, a shifted fund, a redirected invoice, or maybe not even that. Maybe he's fully let go. And yet, if that's true, how come his ghost still steers the wheel? There's a theory that Christy created a digital blueprint, an encrypted instruction set that unfolds like a will, not stored in the cloud, stored physically, passed from courier to courier. If such a thing exists, it hasn't been found. But the consistency of operations makes people wonder. One DEA agent once said, "It's like chasing a religion. No matter who you stop, there's always someone else reciting the same lines." And what are those lines? Don't talk, don't hurry, don't leave trails. The Kinahan ethos lives on. Not because people fear Christy, but because his structure worked better than any boss's orders ever could. Even now, in a world full of new pressures, AI surveillance, biometric databases, tighter sanctions, Christy's old routes still reappear in new forms. Same ports, same redundancies, same strategies. And the difference? No one ever says his name out loud. What's closest to Christy now is ghost-level continuity. He's no longer a fugitive. He's a method that survived its creator. Even the media grows weary. New figures take the spotlight. Cartels rise in Mexico. Cybercrime outfits dominate headlines. Christy fades from the front page. Not forgotten, just archived. But in the quiet rooms, the briefings, the secure calls, the redacted files, his name still whispers. Because some puzzles never get solved. They just stop getting airtime. And maybe that's the real victory. Not in dying rich, not in escaping prison, in becoming unresolvable. A story that never quite finishes. A ghost no one can lay to rest. So wherever Christy Kinahan is tonight, whether he's sipping tea under a foreign moon, or watching security feeds in a darkened flat miles from any jurisdiction, he knows the system still runs, the silence still holds, and he's still beyond the reach of the clumsy spotlight, a shadow at the edge of function. The rarest kind of power is the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. And by now, Christy Kinahan is the closest thing organized crime has to pure inference. His name never needs to be said for his rules to be followed. He has, in a very real sense, become the negative space that shapes the entire picture. What's closest to Christy now is irreducible legacy. He's not gone. He's not finished. He's just too thoroughly diluted into the systems he built to ever be fully extracted. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Of all the global criminal organizations targeted by transnational task forces, none have resisted central collapse as effectively as the Kinahan network. Not because they were the most violent, not because they had the most soldiers, but because of how they organized around absence. And absence, when refined, becomes armor. You can't assassinate an idea. You can't handcuff a template. Many people still think Christy Kinahan must be alone now, hollowed out by paranoia, aging in a quiet panic. So what do you think? Could it be that he's exactly where he wanted to end up all along? If the Empire runs without him, isn't that the final proof of mastery? Because Christy never craved the throne. He craved the blueprint. He didn't want the cheers. He wanted continuity, and continuity is what he got. He no longer issues orders. He no longer meets informants at cafes or signs contracts in code. He doesn't have to. The people downstream know what to do. They've seen the consequences of deviation, not brutality, but removal, a subtle exile. A hand brushing the chess piece off the board. No noise, no fuss. What's closest to Christy now is predictive equilibrium. The system corrects itself. When a courier strays, someone else quietly replaces them. When a shipping firm gets flagged, a dormant one awakens. Its kinetic silence, even the law enforcement agencies tasked with stopping him begin shifting language. He's no longer the mastermind. He's the progenitor. A different tone. Less accusation, more reverence. The Kinahan name still carries weight in the underworld. But the man behind it? He's less a threat and more a threshold. You don't pass into serious international trafficking until you understand how Kinahan did it. He's the watermark of elite-level organization. What's closest to Christy now is absence as authorship. A shipping container moves from West Africa to Belgium via Spain. Everything's clean. Paperwork, licensing, inspections. And yet, the structure feels familiar. A customs agent flags it. A watchdog cross-references the logistics firm. They catch nothing. But one analyst, buried deep in an office in The Hague, mutters, "That's Kinahan-style scaffolding," not because he saw Christy, but because Christy's method is traceable, not through action, but form. Meanwhile, Daniel's visibility continues to ripple through headlines. His presence in Dubai remains uncomfortable for Western officials. Bounties still hang. Fighters distance themselves. Sanctions tighten. But Christy remains untagged. Not by chance, by exit strategy. He knew that centrality equals exposure. So he stepped back long before the flames came close. And now, what's closest to him is obscurity done right. You don't see his name in Panama Papers leaks. You don't hear his voice in wiretaps. You don't spot his image on airport CCTV. But you feel the structure shift when someone breaks the rules. You hear his doctrine in the way operatives speak. You sense his outline in the restraint of an empire that still refuses chaos. There's even a theory among law enforcement that Christy may have sold the intellectual skeleton of his system to other groups, cartels in Eastern Europe, syndicates in Asia, like a franchise license. If true, he didn't just survive, he diversified. What's closest to him now is permanence without spotlight, and maybe that's how it ends. Not with a bang, not with a raid, but with a slow, elegant fade into function, into something that doesn't require him anymore, but will always echo him, like a signature dissolved into the ink of a contract, like a fingerprint smudged just enough to be unreadable, but still real. Somewhere Christy Kinahan lives, or walks, or waits, or maybe he doesn't. But the system moves, and the silence remains. The silence has now outlived the sound. Christy Kinahan's name no longer shouts in reports. It hums in footnotes, a kind of acknowledged constant in the landscape of global organized crime. He is, at this stage, no longer being hunted so much as he is being acknowledged. Like weather, like gravity, present, predictable, and impossible to pin down. What's closest to Christy now is unspoken compliance. Even outside his own web, smaller criminal outfits follow his rules, often without realizing they're doing it. Operational cells in southern Italy mimic his logistic structures. Balkan syndicates rotate drivers and shell firms in cycles eerily similar to his. These are not franchises. They're cultural residue. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Major smuggling corridors through Western Europe, especially those moving product from South America to the UK, remain frustratingly hard to police. Despite expanded budgets, seizures, and digital tracking, most high-volume networks continue to operate with minimal friction, and analysts keep finding themselves whispering the same thing. This feels Kinahan, not because his name is on it, because his fingerprint of restraint is. Many people still think that only violent power survives. So what do you think? Could it be that refined anonymity is the highest evolution of influence? Christy doesn't post, doesn't call, doesn't need to. He became the shape of things. What's closest to him now is design as distance. He might be in a villa in northern Cyprus, or a shadowy compound near Muscat, or nowhere at all. But decisions are still being made in his style. Quiet, efficient, adaptable. You know it when you see it. Multiple couriers who don't know each other. Legal paperwork so boring it passes unnoticed. Companies that collapse precisely 3 days after being flagged. It's his way, now taught by people who never knew his face. Some say he spends his time reading, that he's built a personal library of international trade manuals, legal loopholes, and books on systems theory. Others say he walks daily, alone, watching the street patterns of whatever city he's in, always counting the seconds between traffic light changes. And then there's the strangest theory, that he has already left crime entirely, that he's passed the torch, not to Daniel, but to inertia. And what's closest to Christy now is the myth of necessary presence. Because even when systems run flawlessly, we still ask, is someone watching? With Kinahan, the answer is both yes and no. There's a lawyer in Luxembourg who still refuses to speak his name, despite no active charges. There's a freight coordinator in Rotterdam who still double-checks paperwork out of habit, just in case that old network resurfaces. There's a customs officer in Cadiz who teaches new recruits to look for the absence of red flags, not their presence, because that's how the smart ones do it. And in every one of those acts, Christy's ghost. What's closest to him now is the insulation of time. Statutes run out. Surveillance focus shifts. Governments reprioritize. But the ports still work. The handlers still handle. The names still rotate. The network doesn't need a king. It needs rhythm. And Christy's rhythm still holds. The DEA still mentions him. So does Europol. But the tone has changed. Not urgent, not accusatory, just inevitable. And that inevitability is a kind of victory. The world kept turning, and Christy was already in its seams. He's no longer pulling strings. He is the string. What's closest to Christy now is structure as sanctuary. And maybe he watches the news sometimes, sipping coffee in a robe, smirking at grainy stills of a face he barely recognizes as his own. Maybe he opens an old folder on an encrypted laptop just to watch the network's data hum. Or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's asleep while the system works, still moving containers, still shifting currencies, still obeying rules that don't have to be written down anymore. And somewhere, a man 2 steps removed from another man opens a ledger, nods, and makes a call. All perfectly legal, all perfectly forgettable, just as Christy designed it. By this point, Christy Kinahan has done something most criminal figures never achieve. He's disappeared without unraveling. His name has become shorthand for a particular flavor of quiet, corporate crime. His systems, the low-profile shell firms, the courier chains, the faceless logistics, are taught in university criminology classes, analyzed in government white papers, and quietly admired by criminal engineers across the globe. And yet, Christy has never published a memoir, never spoken to the press, never slipped. What's closest to him now is the luxury of irrelevance. Not that he's unimportant, but that he's crafted a life where importance no longer demands presence. There's a mainstream historical fact here. As of the late 2020s, despite global sanctions, massive bounties, and coordinated law enforcement efforts, not a single verified photo of Christy Kinahan in public has surfaced in over a decade. Interpol still lists him. The US still offers money. But inside those agencies, some investigators privately admit they're no longer sure if he's even active. And that's the brilliance. Many people still think legacy is about being remembered. So what do you think? Could it be that Christy built a different kind of legacy? One that persists by forgetting the man and repeating the method? Because that method is still alive. Shipping manifests still circulate in Kinahan format. Tax filings still mimic his old Gibraltar structures. Legal defenses echo strategies pioneered by lawyers who once worked under his name, but now bill independently, silently, from Malta or Zug. What's closest to Christy now is composure without credit. He doesn't need to take a victory lap. He's not writing op-eds or building a legend. His silence is the legend. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, that a young European trafficker once posted a video bragging about his international operation. He got 10 million views and was arrested within the month. Someone in the comments wrote, "Christy wouldn't have liked that. 10 words, no likes, deleted within the hour." But the point stood. He is the standard of subtlety. And the world he left behind, if he did in fact leave, still operates with the same grace. A port in Tunisia waves through a container. A warehouse in Slovakia takes delivery. A bank transfer from a holding firm in Cyprus completes. No fireworks, no suspects, just systems. What's closest to Christy now is lasting invisibility. Not hiding, but integrated, dissolved, built into the process. One customs official in Antwerp said, "The thing about Kinahan's structure was that it always looked legal. That was the trick. It didn't hide, it blended. And blending has always been the cornerstone of Christy's design. Even in personal details, he erased distinctions. No tattoos, no flashy cars, no indulgences. If he ever lived lavishly, no one ever saw it. And so the search continues without tension. Like trying to hear silence, analysts still track the shape of trade flows. Investigators still follow the scent of documents that smell too clean. They call it Kinahan coded. Not because Christy wrote it, but because someone studied someone who studied someone who did. His influence is now a kind of informational DNA, replicated, mutated, persistent. What's closest to him now is the beauty of disengagement. Maybe he walks through crowded markets with nothing but a folded newspaper in hand. Maybe he wears the same clothes each week, eats the same meals, leaves no scent. Or maybe he's long retired. No phones, no accounts, just the sea and an old man's gaze. But it doesn't matter, because the machine is still running. Not just in Europe, in South America, in Asia. In the idea that crime doesn't need to be messy, that money doesn't need to shout, that control doesn't need to raise its hand. Christy's greatest act was subtraction, and now all that remains is the echo of restraint. Christy Kinahan is no longer the headline. He's the footnote that shapes every story written after him. What was once a tightly held criminal network has become something more abstract, an instructional style, a quiet school of operation, followed by those who prize survival over swagger. It's no longer about Christy's command. It's about his consistency. What's closest to him now is distributed memory. His fingerprints aren't on the crates. His name isn't on the leases. But somewhere between Brussels and Bogota, Rotterdam and Rabat, people are still moving weight according to the cadence he set long ago. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Recent seizures across Europe and South America continue to demonstrate levels of planning and redundancy once unique to the Kinahan model. Cargo wrapped in legal cargo, companies built solely for the temporary ownership of other companies, a shell game with no end. One European anti-narcotics chief was quoted saying, "We no longer ask who runs it. We ask, who's following the template? Because now, that's the thing. The Kinahan system doesn't need to be led. It only needs to be understood." Many people still think the end of a criminal mastermind happens with handcuffs and flashing cameras. So what do you think? Could it be that the true victory is becoming so operationally embedded that even your absence performs the job? What's closest to Christy now is functional myth. He doesn't need protection. The system protects itself. And perhaps that's why he's never had a fall from grace. Because he never courted grace. He never built statues of himself or bathed in public loyalty. He didn't rule with charisma. He ruled with spreadsheets. There's a rumor, never confirmed, that somewhere deep in the Moroccan port logistics registry, a legacy access code still exists. It's not labeled. It doesn't lead to a real person, but it grants the ability to reroute containers. No questions asked. Customs clerks call it the ghost code. They don't know who programmed it, but its logic feels familiar. What's closest to Christy now is operational grace. He didn't design systems that needed constant tending. He built ones that expect fluctuation, that bend, that absorb pressure. So when governments freeze accounts, the network breathes out through others. When new surveillance tech appears, The handlers switch cities, companies, couriers, like changing suits. He once said, according to one old associate, "Don't build for control, build for continuity," and he did. His old crew, fractured but still fluent. His old routes, rewritten but still connected. There's no more need for a kingpin. The throne is empty, but the kingdom runs on its own. Daniel remains the more public face, even as sanctions tighten and photos surface with diminishing frequency. He's still orbiting the same old systems, trying to keep the empire coherent under brighter lights. But Christy? He stepped away long ago. Maybe entirely. Maybe not. What's closest to him now is unseen authorship. A ledger opens. A wire is sent. A container clears. Each one, a sentence in the grammar he created. No one thanks him. No one has to. Somewhere, in a quiet apartment or a distant compound, Christy Kinahan sits at a window. The view doesn't matter. Sea, desert, skyline. It's the stillness that counts. He doesn't speak. He doesn't direct, but he knows. The structure is still intact. The principles still hold. The rhythm continues. He doesn't need to win anymore. He already did. There comes a moment in every story, especially the ones that linger in the shadows, when the main character becomes irrelevant, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. Christy Kinahan has reached that moment. What's closest to him now is completion by dispersion. The network no longer speaks his name, not because it's dangerous, but because it's unnecessary. The people operating today weren't recruited by Christy. They were trained by people who once sat in rooms he designed. He isn't leading. He isn't watching. He isn't waiting. He isn't needed. There's a mainstream historical fact here. In the past 3 years, several international criminal organizations have collapsed under the weight of their own central figures, flashy leaders who couldn't stay off camera, who trusted too few or too many, who thought the empire was theirs. Christy never made that mistake. He never owned the empire. He drafted it. Many people still think that a crime boss must end in one of 3 ways: death, prison, or exile. So what do you think? Could it be that Christy Kinahan added a 4th ending? Disappearance into continuity? Because even now, seizures happen, names change, bounties are renewed, but the rhythm continues. What's closest to Christy now is the comfort of systems working without intervention. He no longer touches the valves, but the pressure holds. A raid in Germany uncovers a delivery note using a coding format only 2 people alive can explain. A customs irregularity in Durban mirrors one seen in Antwerp 15 years prior. In Bogota, a logistics firm collapses 48 hours after a minor investigation. No arrests, no records, just emptiness, and the analysts shake their heads, because the trail, once again, ends before it begins. This is what he always wanted. What's closest to Christy now is precision without attribution. He doesn't need to leave behind a signature. He left behind standard operating procedure. There's a theory that he wrote a final version of the playbook, not in a document, in human memory, passed on in pieces, through phrases, habits, reminders whispered over coffee or a glass of wine. Don't take pride in the plan. Take pride in how invisible it looks. Don't build loyalty, build replacements. Never own the container. Own the confusion around it. Whether those are apocryphal doesn't matter. They're lived out daily. Daniel? He still struggles under public weight. The heat around him makes headlines. But the infrastructure now extends far beyond him. Even if he vanished, Christie's systems would still run. What's closest to Christy now is freedom through forgettability. Not only do people not know where he is, they don't need to. And that is the ultimate form of insulation. Maybe he walks a beach most mornings. Maybe he gardens. Maybe he reads economic journals and watches people pass, anonymous, unnoticed. Maybe he has no phone. Maybe he has one, but it's always off. The world kept spinning, and he faded into it like vapor. Somewhere, in the corners of files marked confidential or eyes only, his name still appears, but less frequently, more as a formality, a nod to the ghost in the wires. And one day, those files will close, not because they solved him, because they expired trying. What's closest to Christy now is peace earned by erasure, not erasure of impact, just erasure of exposure. He didn't need to be feared. He needed to be unseen, and now he is. The shipments still move, the money still flows, the code still hums, but the man became mist. It ends, not with a siren, not with a spotlight, but with a stillness so complete it almost hums. Christy Kinahan, the man, the myth, the method, has reached the outer edge of relevance. Not because he faded, but because he designed his departure so meticulously, it became indistinguishable from the world he left behind. What's closest to Christy now is silence that outlives memory. His name isn't mentioned in Port Authority briefings. His signature no longer haunts wire fraud audits. The photos in the Interpol archive grow older each year, but no newer ones ever appear. And the network? It behaves like a ghost made of steel, quiet, untraceable, but utterly operational. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Most large-scale criminal networks, when decapitated, collapse within 18-24 months. The Kinahan network is now entering year 15 of post-leadership resilience. There is no press conference, no sudden fall, no dramatic confession. There is only the slow, dignified dimming of a light that knew when to retreat from its own glow. Many people still think real power requires presence. So what do you think? Could it be that Christy proved real power is when absence continues to command? Because everything still echoes him. The reluctance of operatives to speak names aloud. The architecture of shell companies with roots in jurisdictions that don't cooperate. The choreography of silence among lawyers, bankers, and middlemen. These aren't accidents. These are leftovers from a structure that didn't fall. It matured. What's closest to Christy now is the myth that doesn't need marketing. He never did podcasts, never signed movie rights, never leaned into notoriety. And because of that, his absence feels stronger than any flashy legend ever could. The myth isn't about Christy. It's beyond him. It exists in whispered boardroom protocols, in the muttered caution of junior smugglers. Don't make noise. Christy didn't. And maybe, just maybe, that's the softest kind of immortality. So if you're still listening, still awake, or just about to drift off, imagine him now, an old man, indistinct, walking a sun-warmed back alley in some Mediterranean village. No guards, no followers, no need to look over his shoulder, because no one remembers his face, only the frame he left behind. And what's closest to Christy now is completion. Not as a man, as an idea. He's not gone. He's just no longer necessary. And in the strange, intricate world of criminal design, that's not defeat. It's graduation. And now, as the rhythm of Christy Kinahan's life slows to its final hush, so too can yours. There's something deeply soothing in knowing that even the most complex stories, filled with codes and containers, whispers and war rooms, can settle into quiet endings. The man who built an empire from silence didn't need fireworks. He just needed time. As you lie back tonight, let the weight of that stillness cover you like a soft blanket. Let your breathing match the gentle rise and fall of forgotten tides. Imagine a place where no questions need answers, where everything that had to happen already has. Think of dark hallways no longer walked, desks long abandoned, and ports that still hum with motion, even without a master. The blueprint lives, but the architect has gone quiet. You are safe here in the drift of this ending. There are no alarms, no foot chases, only the gradual dimming of old lights. Let your thoughts float, like ships on gentle waters, bearing no names, bound for no urgent shore. If you dream tonight, may they be slow and foggy, full of rooms you've never seen and steps you never need to take. The story is complete, and so are you. Rest easy. Good night.